Anyway, but the point being that my experience here at Michigan Tech taught me a couple things. It taught me that there's nothing so hard that I can't learn it, even if it does take me 2.5 times to pass dynamics. Bill Credibon's not here. And it taught me that if I stay at it long enough, if I ask for enough help, if I reach out to people who are better at it than I am, then I will be able to contribute in a very positive way to anything I set my mind to. And that's what I got out of Michigan Tech.
Anyone else want to jump in there? No? Dan, why don't you jump in and talk a little bit about, so we've talked a lot about computer science as a discipline, but we, I make sure computing disciplines are plural. So what other disciplines do we represent?
Can I go back to one question?
Absolutely.
Because I wanted to jump in on this one because so I agree with what I've heard Dave say and others that computing is in everything. So when we were looking at the university and thinking about, where do we want to go in computing, one of the things that people who are involved in that probably remember me saying many times, if computing is everywhere, then computing is nowhere. And we had this challenge, I think, because computing was everywhere at Michigan Tech, it's still true. People could legitimately say, well, then why do we need a college of computing? It's everyone's already doing it, right? Everyone's already doing computing. And I think Linda hit on the answer to that, which is that even if everyone is doing it, there needs to be someone who's going to stand up and say, here's how you do it well. So the other little joke that I like to say is that, all these sort of amateur programmers, they're like little kids singing in church. They're adorable, but not very good. Right? and so we keep singing. So we need people who will stand up and say, to be an example to the university and say, this is the way to do it right. So I agree with everything you said, Linda. So that's my one answer to a question a minute ago. Now, what was the next question?
The computing disciplines within your department in particular, but beyond computer science.
Right. So we do want to, in the College of Computing, we want to sort of be an example of extending computing beyond the fundamentals, foundations of computer science. So in my department, we have electrical engineering technology, we have mechatronics, we have computer network and system administration, we have health informatics, we have cybersecurity. And so there is a side of computing which actually is not software development. Okay? There is the other piece of computing, which is creating the computing resources for all of you to be able to do your programming that you want to do. And we sort of think of that as computing infrastructure. So there are lots of parts of computing which actually, it's a place, my department is a place for some students to go that actually don't like programming, believe it or not. IT professionals, the ones that give you the resources that you need. And so that's an important piece of computing as well, and that's one of the aspects of it. And because we also have the EET and mechatronics in cooperation with other units of Michigan Tech, the College of Engineering, we also work on operations technology as well. So other kinds of infrastructure, sort of physical infrastructure that's going to be blended with the computing infrastructure. And that blending is only going to get more and more tighter as time goes on, with what we call IT, OT convergence, information technology, operations technology. That's sort of the hallmark of Industry 4.0. And so we're kind of moving in that direction in the Department of Applied Computing.
Excellent.
If I can, what really stands out to me there is that what you're seeing is the College of Computing evolve real time. That is, Michigan, you shouldn't be surprised. Michigan Tech's been evolved. They were a mining school, right? There's not a lot of mining being taught anymore, right? So over the course of time, you see this evolution, and it was possible. Nobody wants to hear about back when you were in college. But when I was here, I could get a mechanical engineering degree with almost no programming. I did have fortunate. We did. We were fortunate to learn a little bit more Fortran. But you could get your mechanical engineering degree without any computing. You can't do that today. It has to be part of the. It's an ingredient of your degree. So that evolution in just a short time since I was here. That's the cool part. And that's what when Dan talks about what's coming next. it's a constant evolution in computing. From an outsider, that's the coolest part about it.
Eric makes an excellent point. Michigan Tech has changed continuously. Started out in College of Mines, serving the mining industry, and obviously created a lot of strengths in terms of geology and mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and then the Industrial Revolution came over, mining receded, and manufacturing took over, and we transitioned to the Michigan College of Mining and Technology, and then to the Michigan Technological University, and we moved towards what the future was bringing in the third industrial revolution and then the fourth industrial revolution. But with every major change, Michigan Tech has evolved, and not changing would be different. Changing is not different. Not changing would be different for Michigan Tech, and that's part of it.
In my discipline, so I pointed out all my degrees are in chemistry, but I'm working in biomedical space. And we underwent a transition a decade and a half ago. It's not dissimilar from the quantum revolution that happened in physics 100 years before that. So our ability to interrogate what's going on in the cell, we could do those interrogations overnight, generate not as much data that might have taken 100 grad students 100 years to generate before that. And so all of a sudden we're generating huge amounts of data. We're using computers to extract knowledge and understanding out of that data. And we're realizing everything that we understood about the cell was wrong. We had a very reductionist sort of micro view of what's going on. It turns out that life is very, very interconnected. And the term systems plays out in biology probably better in any space that I know. So we had to rewrite textbooks over the last decade and a half because of our ability to do these, to generate data, extract knowledge from it. And I think we're seeing that sort of same transition play out in many other disciplines as we go forward. I always like to point out that I know exactly when my wife is looking to go buy something when the ads start showing up, right? So marketing is being revolutionized, policing is being revolutionized. Everything is, all disciplines are changing because of this. And a lot of that change is being driven by some of the sexiest, most high visibility companies in the country. Computing and innovation and startup and entrepreneurship are sort of commingled together in how we think about these things. And so, Eric, I sort of toss this to you to talk a little bit about what you see going on in this exciting, evolving space.
Yeah, I think in the entrepreneur space, that line, what's your degree in, is probably blurred even more because, like, your startup, the success of your startup doesn't really care what your degree is, right? There's a guy in our space right now, aeronautical engineer from U.S. Naval Academy. Guy's a total rock star. His company, extremely successful, is doing logistics and supply chain AI mapping to try to find the most optimal route for your supply chain. It doesn't care that he's an aerospace engineer, right? So I think in the startup space, you better know computing. Your business is going to touch computing. And it doesn't really care if you're a mechanical engineer or a biomedical engineer, electrical engineer, what you are. It doesn't care. So I think that line gets a lot more blurred, but my gosh, you better have some computing in there.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, I don't want to dominate it here, but I have to say that having managed large teams of engineering, it's amazing the degrees that people have. I've talked with them because software plays such a big role in a lot of software people and Intel chips and chip technology. And yes, there's a lot of computer engineers, electrical engineers, computer scientists, but you see astronomers and mathematicians and philosophers, people who have a degree in philosophy. They just they earn their way into the system and they have particular skill and expertise. And quite honestly, after you've been out of school for 5 or 10 years, it's sort of, what have you done since?
Well, and I'll just add on, I'll say it even a little bit differently. It's not even that they've earned their way into the system. It's that the system is craving that level of diversity and that approach from all the different areas and all the different perspectives, because, everybody comes at a problem from a different direction. And so it actually makes it better, faster, stronger when we have folks coming in from all the different areas.
So
But I'm a little biased.
Yeah, but let's dig into that a little bit. I mean, so tonight we, in large part, we're celebrating all of Linda's accomplishments, but in particular her accomplishments in promoting diversity within computer science. But we still have a long way to go as a university, as a college, but as an industry as well. And so what should we be doing? How can we make computing more accessible to all people?
We always look at the women to answer this question. And I have to say that as I look out in the audience, I would say that to ask us is to ask the people who are already in the field, who chose this field because we loved it, who stayed in it because we loved it. In order to understand the complex nature that this question brings, you have to ask the people that left. You have to ask the people that never chose a degree in computing in the first place. And to actually further diversity in this industry, which is still dominated by men, the women can't do the work. There's many more men in this field than there are women. And we need you guys to be advocating for having this diverse voice. We need you to advocate to your peers, to your wives, to your daughters, to your nieces, to your nephews, to your sons, to understand that it's going to take all of us. We have a lot of big problems to solve. We can't solve it with half of the population.
The half of the population, only a very small percentage of that half is in the industry.
So let's take a second and ask the audience, is there anything that you're dying to know or like to hear? Hilleberg, hang on a second.
Thank you very much for your insights. Are you ever thinking about a future where people don't need to understand computers to do their jobs? Every physician's office I go to, they will come and look at you. Now they are dealing with software. Oh, this software doesn't show that. Oh, the other software has it. Let me go to the other computer and get it. And I'm asking for some things, and they are not able to get it without assistance. What steps do we need to have so that computers are there, prevalent, but transparent?
Who wants to tackle that easy question?
Well, I would like to say the dream has always been, coming out of the computer industry, to make it invisible, to make it like the air we breathe. It's necessary for life, but we don't think about it. And we do that by making it more capable and more human-centric. A lot of the software that is used today, people are, as you point out, are aware of. If you ask a young person if they have a computer, you often get the answer no, but they take out their smartphone. And that's a wonderful case of making computing invisible, making it just part of the air that we breathe and part of our life. People driving cars don't understand all the things that a computer does inside of a car. That's special. That's what we want. We want this computing to be invisible, but omnipresent. It's part of everything, but nobody's aware of it, because otherwise we're taking mental cycles away from people.
I think that really is the radio. That sometimes scares me a little bit when we try to make it. I think it's very important when we think about the systems. It's very important when we think about making it usable. But it's also important that we do what we need to do to make sure that the users understand the information they're given. Because I had an experience talking with a doctor who had been looking at an image, and was making some comments about the image and, you know, the fact that it had ground. Except for, that was a 2D image. And if you take a 2D image at different times, you don't necessarily know you got the same angle, right? Yeah, you know, and so, you know, and I said, this is a 2D image, right, not a 3D image. And the doctor looked at me like, huh? You know, and so in my mind, it's all, you know, it's making it usable, but it's also making sure, and this goes a lot to what I think in terms of machine learning, a lot of the AI, is, you know, making sure that the tools we're providing also come somehow with sufficient information that they're being used appropriately and the information that's coming out is understood, you know, and yeah, so that's, and so to make all that happen, I don't know the answer, but I think that's something we need to think about.
And another piece of that, an issue with making it invisible is the safety and the security of it, right? I mean, the whole cyber, you know, that one of the issues that we have right now with cybersecurity is that computing is so ubiquitous and everyone's using it. We're not aware of all the things that are going on that we may not be aware of and that we should be aware of, and that's why we have, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of cybersecurity job openings right now for people, you know, to understand those issues. So when you say computing's like the air we breathe, I mean, you're right. We have to make sure the air is not poisonous, right?
One of the problems is that when we created the whole computing capability in the universe, we all had these visions for wonderful things it could do, and it's done many of those wonderful things, but there are bad people out there, and bad people will do bad things. And if you give bad people a new tool, they'll do bad things with that tool. And we see now what's happening in society due to the computing infrastructure and how the spread of misinformation and the driving people to the fringes and the, you know, people going down the rabbit hole and ability for foreign nations to affect our elections and for people to using computing tools to manipulate our minds and our preferences, sometimes called advertising, but not always in our best interest. And how, I think that's one of the challenges of computing going forward, is how do we make it safe? How do we make it reliable? How do we, you know, cybersecurity is just one aspect of it, but mind melding and mind manipulation is another area where computing is being used today for very, very bad purposes, very evil, that are not serving society. And I think you made a great analogy. It's like breathing poisonous air. Air actually that has something in it that you can't detect, but is poisonous.
Even if we back out of the sinister, you know, place, which is true, but we also have to continue to teach distrust in other ways, which is trust and verify.
Yeah.
And so when you see, but the algorithm told me this, right? You still have to understand what was the problem I was trying to solve. Logically speaking, is this the right answer? Like, you know, is there something about this that, what are my expectations and why do these things violate my expectations? What cynicism, what skepticism, what second guessing, what proofing can I apply to this answer to help me understand whether this is just a mistake, because we make mistakes, right?
Which is why, back row, differential equations matter.
Mic drop. So, you know, this is apropos. So we talked a lot about the T-shaped professional today at our advisory board meeting. How do we make sure that we train computing professionals that have the broad cross-cutting skills? We're going through another discussion right now across campus around what we expect as far as general ed, or what we're calling essential ed. And one of the things I would love to hear, you know, building on this, is how do we teach our students and our graduates to think about the ethical consequences of the technologies they produce? And how do we teach people to have the mental construct to think through that, and the courage to think through how it could play out.
Yeah, it's interesting because along with engineers, I have a pretty decent sized product management organization. And one of the things, as we go through things like the business case and does it solve a customer problem? One of the questions we always ask is, should we build it? It's not can we build it, it's should we build it? And I think that that's a really important key to everything, regardless of what we're building or how we're building it or what that thing is. And, you know, I see it show up in the product management discipline a lot more now than I did, 10 years ago. But I think that's a key question is not only can we, it's should we. And that's how we're approaching it in our industry at least.
I'll add that the humanities give us a lot of lessons around understanding ethics, around understanding the world in a broader way. And we need to build truly well-rounded individuals. While we can expect that some people's parents did a good job of, getting them to that point, not all of them did, and not all of them had those tools. And I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of leadership readings of classical literature of things that you wouldn't expect to get in a leadership role that help me understand the world better and help me understand the should we. And so I think that when we're talking about general ed, let's not dismiss that as the checkbox of things that you have to do to get a degree. Let's talk about that as a checkbox of things you have to do to be a well-rounded individual in the world that we live in today.
Well said.
Well, we spent a lot of time today at the EAB talking about what we do very well at Michigan Tech, which is preparing students for careers. And I'm unapologetic about that. I'm okay with that. But there is this other conversation that I hear from time to time that the role of a public university or a publicly funded private university, as Dennis likes to call it, has nothing to do with that. It's to develop a well-educated citizenry, to create, well-educated citizens who can be a part of society and who can think before they vote and all these other things. That was part of the vision for public universities 100 years ago and more. And I'm all about helping students, be prepared for jobs. But we need to. I think this speaks to your point about general education. Becoming a good citizen is also important, or helping people become good citizens, and also an important role for universities to play.
Okay. Any question? Oh, we have several questions here. All right, I saw your hand up.
Yeah. I guess my question is, we talked a lot about what the college computing can do for students, how it'll help them gain more education in various manners. But like, for those of you who have been in the industry for a long time, how do you relate what you wish engineers had or young engineers had to what you think the college of computing will now provide? For example, if I wish my intro engineers had X, how can you let the college of computing supply those engineers with that thing? I guess that makes sense.
Can you tell us what X is?
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. Like, maybe like the simpler question is, what is your wish list that you wish newer engineers had from an education standpoint? And do you think that the college of computing can help with that? And if so, how?
So the question is, I'll repeat it in case it doesn't show up on the recording, is what do you wish that, what does industry wish that graduates of Michigan Tech come out with in order to be contributing members of society?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
What's a wish list look like? From my perspective, the wish list is what I just said, is that I hope you will have a deep technical understanding of the discipline that you chose to study. I also hope that you will have a broad understanding, the top of the T, of many other things to be able to apply that discipline into the real world and to be able to make those dynamic choices. And I hope that you'll come with the curiosity that helps you sustain that throughout your career. The university can provide 2 of those things, but not 3.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
I would like you to come with a sense of, I'll say, purpose of don't just code or engineer because someone told you to. Like, what are we after? I don't want to call it project management, but have a view of where you're going and why you're doing the discipline. I think it's common for a fresh out to say, sweet, got all the technical skills, got what I need, and somebody just tell me what to code. Think past that. And the quicker you get to that, I think the more valuable you are to the company as well, but have a sense of where you're going.
I would say grit. The willingness to take a problem that is difficult, that you don't understand, and have the confidence in yourself to solve that problem, to do whatever it takes to make that happen.
If it's it's good start. Like, so if you're a Michigan Tech grad, I contend you have that. Like I would hire a Michigan Tech grad any day, all day. I'm probably at homework because I went here, but the grit and the perseverance that you have here, that you're getting here, that you've gotten here is I think it's if I may, it's in there. It's inside. So I pick a Michigan Tech grad, and I think it's inside.
What about working in diverse teams and with people from different backgrounds? Something we talked a lot about today is that cross-cutting skill set of the teaching professional, being comfortable with working with people deeply who are sort of outside your tribe or outside of your background as well, because that's ultimately where they're going to end up when they leave here.
Yeah, and I'll say the ability to work across time zones, the ability to work via video. A hybrid work is not going away. And I think, I think we're all blessed now to have a bit of a choice on how we choose to work and how we choose to collaborate. But that being said, the ability to collaborate without sitting next to the person who your success depends on and their success depends on you, and having those skill sets, I think is something that as we look forward, is a skill set that we're all going to have, but especially in the engineering profession.
Excellent.
And a commitment and a recognition that success isn't just yours on your own, that success depends on the other person that you're sitting next to, and that your success is their success and their success is your success. So don't turn it into a confrontational thing. Figure out how to work with everybody, figure out how to make it work. Really, there are too many problems to solve for all of us to get all territorial and find that, we don't want to work together and start arguing and doing all kinds of bad behaviors. We need to figure out how to work together, and we need to figure out how to do that pretty quickly.
There are no winners on a losing team, and there are no losers on a winning team. And the first objective should be to make the team win. In the industry, there's lots of different teams out there competing with you, and there's only one that typically winds up on top. So if you can't cooperate with others and work with others, that's critical. But from a diversity standpoint, unfortunately, I grew up in a white male-dominated industry at the time. But a story that I heard from somebody in the automotive industry was actually a woman who used to run Google's autonomous car program, and now has her own startup that's trying to generate software that can be used in any automotive application for autonomous. But she said that coming in as a woman in the automotive industry, it was like, oh God, some of the decisions that they made. She said, like, whoever came up with the idea of a seatbelt going from your left shoulder to your right hip, that was not a woman that did that. And who put the cup holder in the middle where your kid could kick over your drink? That wasn't a woman that did that. You went over in the door and she went on about all the different things in car design that until women had a voice, really we had a male-dominated industry that made male-dominated choices. But on a broader standpoint, diversity brings different points of view, and whether it's gender diversity or race or geographic Today, a lot of teams are made of software teams with people in Eastern Europe and different parts of the world, as well as in the United States, spread all over the place. And experience in diversity in every aspect brings better overall solutions, because you get more different points of view on any one problem. You take them together aggregately, you've got a much better point of view of the program. Where if you narrow the distribution of the people working on a particular issue, you're going to have a very narrow solution that comes out of that. And so diversity of any kind helps in team success.
And expanding on diversity and making sure that you understand what inclusion is the only way to sustain that. You can build a diverse team, but if you don't actually build an inclusive team, you've wasted your time and you burned all of the goodwill that you tried to build. If I can just leave you with one tactic for helping other folks in your organization who might be suffering from from a lack of inclusion. If you're in a meeting and you see someone dominating the questions and you see that person who's trying to get a word in, but it just keeps leaning forward or has really bright eyes, has a question, and can't seem to interrupt the conversation in order to get in there, just say, I think so-and-so has something to say. You do the interrupting for them. Anybody can do this. Just figure out a way to interrupt the person who probably doesn't even realize that they're blocking this person who has something to say. Let that person get their opinion out there, because it might be really the game changer that.
It goes even deeper in that there are people who just don't speak up. There are people who dominate the conversation. And unless you hear from everybody, you're not getting all the information. So not only somebody's trying to break in, but somebody who's just sitting there calling, do you have something to say?
That's a really good point. Also, we've built a special way to deal with that at Netflix, where we have a memo-based culture, where before we have one of these big meetings where you're going to be brainstorming things, there are people, probably like the people you see up here, who are perfectly comfortable interjecting throughout an entire conversation. There are other people who are really deep thinkers, and they'll think on something, they'll read something, and they'll think on it, and they don't want to shoot from the hip. And you don't want them to shoot from the hip. You want them to bring that deep thought into your conversation. And so what we've learned is that if you put that memo out there and you let it live out for comments, that it might take 2 or 3 days for that person to come back with a comment. But man, when they do, it's so much of a contribution. It's so powerful. You lose that if you're only letting those of us, manage and direct the brainstorm.
Yeah, the introvert might have the best idea. Yep. And it might never come out.
Yep.
So a relatively simple answer to a simple question.
That's all the things you got to do.
If you do that, you'll be great.
Yeah,
So there's 3 people that I've seen have their hand up, and I'm gonna get to those 3, and then I have one last question for the group, and we'll end there. So Soner, if you're one of the 3, I'll let you go. I'll bring you.
Okay, I'm going to have a really difficult question for the panel. I looked everywhere for the answer and couldn't find it. So if you cannot answer the question, don't do that. Okay? What is computer science?
So do you want to do computer science in particular or computing?
What is computer science?
Computer science.
Well, there's 2 words and they're in the dictionary. It is the science of computing. I would differentiate it from the science of mechanical engineering or the science of electrical or communication or of chemistry or of geology. There's 2 parts of computing. And the first one is the study of computing as it exists for computing, not for someone else. So I put operating systems, programming languages, a few things like that in that category. They're used by anybody. Then there's the application. And so a self-driving car is the application of computing. So definition goes back to the dictionary. It's computing the science of computing.
What I'm after is really, I would like to see if you can come up with a consensus on that definition.
Consensus
We all agree.
is the lowest.
We're good.
Consensus is the lowest denominator, and it is that if you get one thing that everybody agrees on, you can be sure that you're underestimating the whole situation. So, you know, to me, if we had complete consensus on that, that's a topic you can argue.
I love that we all have consensus on that. Okay, so that way in the back.
Yeah, well, I've been called out by my mother, so I kind of have to. But I actually went to a coding camp in middle school. I went to a summer camp that had a coding class, and I hated it. And it was way over my head, and I walked out of that camp with the idea that I was bad at coding. And I was lucky. I had great role models, three of which are sitting up in front of me on this panel. But coding is not a unintimidating discipline. Coding is an intimidating, computing is an intimidating field, I think, for a lot of people my age. How do you make it more accessible? I can code now. It wasn't that hard. How do you make people realize that, say, before they hit college? You know, I was one of the lucky ones who wasn't discouraged. What do you do for the people who are?
Can I, this is what I will not get consensus on this statement. The question was, what do you do about people who don't like coding and get them past that step? Is that a good summary?
Especially people who are intimidated by coding.
People who are intimidated by coding. Well, first of all, coding is not computing. It's just one thing in computing, one aspect of computing. I've often said that coding is to computer science what carpentry is to architecture. Often in computing, you need to be able to design things, and a lot of people that work in the computing field never code. But you can't have software without coders, just like you can't have houses without carpenters. You need a plumber and electrician as well. And so you need people that understand all aspects of it. Coding is at the entry level, and my belief is you probably don't need a 4-year degree if you're just going to write code. But you know, there are people who will disagree.
And I think part of your question is that, in some sense, coding is the entry. That's how you learn that you're going to enjoy the problem solving, you're going to enjoy building software. You know, you're going to enjoy thinking about it, understanding fundamentals. One of the things I advocate for is dang good teachers teaching intro coding courses, intro programming. And I think, and it is tough, but I think one of the things that has happened, you know, I love the idea that we're trying to get more coding into high school. I love the idea, you know, that there's coding camps and there's all kinds of stuff. I hate the idea that much of that stuff is being taught by people who know nothing about coding. They've had a couple of good courses. They don't have any depth. And that just scares me because, like you said, if it's not done at the right level, you should just be totally intimidated and turned off rather than excited to do something. You know, and even excited, whether or not you're discipline, excited enough to learn what you need to do for whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in because I think the issue is bigger than that. And I'll give you an example. So my daughter, our daughters had a very good friend in 5th grade, African-American female. And as she went into middle school with all of the rest of her class, she was very excited about coding. And so she signed up for the coding club. And as she walked into that coding club in 6th grade in this middle school, she walked in, she was not only the only African-American female, which wasn't all that unusual in Silicon Valley. She was the only female, and it was an entire room full of young Asian and Indian boys. And I think it's bigger than, I tried coding and I don't like it. I think it's incredibly, incredibly important that to understand that we're losing diversity in STEM early and often. And I think that's actually the issue. And I think, I think you both identified some root causes of that, but Diane said it earlier, it is unbelievably important when you think about your nieces and your nephews and your sons and your daughters and your grandkids and all of the folks that you can impact. Think about the fact that we're not losing kids in their freshman year of college and university because it's hard. We're losing kids in 4th and 5th and 6th grade because they don't see the path and they don't enjoy it and it's not fun, right? And so my daughter probably asked the question because she knows it's a hot button for me. But please understand that that one experience took us 6 years to undo for my daughter, right? And you all can impact that going forward. Every one of you touches someone in that range somehow, some way, even if it's volunteering your time in a coding class because you actually know how to do it the right way. And you know what great coding looks like, and you know how to make it fun because you love it. So that's my tactical takeaway.
And I'm the least qualified person to address this question, but that's never stopped. I spent my youth wanting to grow up to be a chemist, and I studied only chemistry, and started tackling problems that required the use of computers, that required that we created new computer solutions to problems that we couldn't solve before. And so, and in my space of building programs on the edge of computing, on the periphery of computing, in bioinformatics, in computational chemistry, by stressing the problems that we can solve, that opened up computing to people who didn't grow up going to the computing camps, who didn't grow up writing code or being directed that way. And I've seen firsthand how addressing from a problem point of view, you've opened up a whole new population of people who embrace computing and move into that space. And so one of the things I would love for us to be able to do is to stress how we can change the world, how we can solve the grand challenge of problems that are out there through the use of computers, and to really pivot to how what is our impact in computing as a tool, computing as a discipline, as a way of making that happen.
We have a serious image problem in computing with females. And the problem was studied by a university, where they took a woman interviewing high school students about the career. And they had a room where she interviewed, and they had all these boy kind of electronic game posters. She was wearing a t-shirt that says, "I code, therefore I am." And it was very much like the boys' bedroom in terms of look, which is the image many girls have of computing. And she interviewed a number of high school seniors, and then they changed the room and they made it very feminine. She put on a more feminine looking outfit, but she asked the same exact questions and had the same exact interview. And they ran a scientific study, and what they found is that the second group had a much higher percent of girls who decided to go into computing. So we have this image that computing is like being in a room with a t-shirt with it's you can't see outside and
Doritos.
Skittles and Mountain Dew.
Right, and social interaction, etc. But that's just a small part of what we are in computing, and we've got some examples here of people who've seen through that or punctured through that. And I don't think that either of you are going to say that's how we life is like. job as well.
Skittles and Mountain Dew.
So the final word on this one, we're going to give to our colleague Chin Ding, who's part of our external advisory board and is also a professor of computer science at the University of Rochester.
The proud graduate of Michigan Tech, so it's here 94 to 96 from MSD. I really felt compelled to say something that the comment Mr. Robert made. It's let me relate to what I did the last week before coming here. It's actually speaking at Rochester School 46. My own buddy had organized this science club of about 10 kids. He says, we got to speak to them about programming, about computers. So I went. None of them is Asian.
Okay.
It's one boy.
Okay.
So the world is not filled with Asian, Indian, or Chinese boys. I think we all need to go out. This is exactly what you said.
That's right.
I had a lot of fun telling them programming. What's a program? It's a schedule. It's a itinerary. That's too big a word. It's a recipe.
Excellent. So we have one last question from the audience, and then I have one more question from the group. Could you care to come up here so we can make sure that everyone hears us in the room and also in the Zoom space?
Thank you so much for today's speech and amazing keynotes. I have a quick question. So basically, since I was in undergrad, I was thinking about the future of the computing, like you guys are talking. And I saw some documentary about the past in 40s, 50s, and 60s that from the vacuum tube, then we, came into.
How old do you think I am?
Not like that. So from the vacuum tube coming to the transistors, and then we move on, and there is a Moore's law that saying that every time they get smaller and faster, but this is going to end in the probably next 10 years or even a little bit more or less. So what would be the situation and then maybe 50 years later, 40 years later? It's a very general question. I heard that some people said there might be quantum computing, genetics computing, or organic computing, these types of things. But if so, what will happen to the current system in the computers, like hardware? I see that a lot of graduate students and PhD students here in CS, I see a lot of graduate students are working on hardware, improving the cache systems, trying to boost it up, trying to make it speed it up more. But what would happen for the traditional or current digital computing? Thank you.
So this was not a plant. Past, present, future. We're ending on the perfect question. What is our computing future going to look like? It's not an easy question. Does anyone want to jump in as they see?
I would like to say that the computing in the past, the computing which will be in the past and future is going the same place that the computing in the past is going, trash. It's going to be obsolete, just like your laptop and your phone get replaced all the time. Today's stuff is going to be junk 5 years from now.
And I think part of your question is, whatever problems people are currently studying that may or may not be relevant in the future, hopefully those same skills they'll be able to apply to whatever paradigm or whatever. It's the kinds of things that I taught Diane a couple of years ago. She's had to pick up a few more things since then. And that's presumably the same thing will happen. So, a lot of what, particularly in the graduate level, but all the way along, is really learning how to solve problems and think about things.
You get to do that's like we're going to be done in a few years, all of us up here, right? But honestly, you get to go define that. That's what the engineers of tomorrow. That's what this education is preparing you for. You get to go. You get to tell us what that's going to look like. So we'll be all in a kayak somewhere, just enjoying the day, and you can tell us what's going to happen. Yeah, I'm gonna win.
The demise of computing as we know it today has been forecast for a really long time. I graduated from Michigan Tech in 1986. I started a job in 1987, and it was all the rage to say that we weren't going to need programmers anymore. These systems are going to write themselves with the way that we're doing visual programming. It's all going to, be taken care of. And like, I think I don't want to be the curmudgeon that's like, that's a little on the edgy side, but I want to say that we found a way to keep going. We found a way to keep living the dream. We found a way to go well beyond what we could have done in 1987, I dare to say. And we've thrown a lot of things at problems. We've thrown distributed systems at problems. We've thrown a vast number of solutions that extend the lifetime of the problems that we're able to solve that we wouldn't even have envisioned back then.
I worked with Gordon Moore for 23 years. And Gordon, throughout that time, he said in his original article that this trend is going to continue for the next 10 years, but I don't know after that. And he said that for all 23 years. And he only could see it for 10 years. And what we're seeing in the popular press talks about the end of Moore's Law, and what they're confusing is Moore's Law without people scanning or shrinking. And that took over in the 70s and it's about out of gas. And now we're looking at all different ways. You mentioned different ways to increase computing. And if you look at what's in the cloud and cloud computing today, we're figuring out how to use those elements in different ways. And you mentioned some other technologies that mentioned about going forward, what kind of computing we might have. And to say that we can't see beyond 10 years, we never knew what was going to happen. And it just, because of the impact on society, there's so much resources that go into it today. There's so much research that's being done in industry and in universities that you just have to have some faith something's going to come out of it. And I believe it's going to continue. I don't believe these people say it's over.
Just stop crypto mining. They'll all be fine.
Tell me about Columbia.
Well, I could tell you about delay limits and shift registers. Sometimes the technology, it might already be here, but it's not quite relevant yet. So I think it's a really good example with artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence has been around since the 60s and 70s, right? But it was for 50 years, it was the technology of the future, always has been, always will be, until about 10 years ago. When combined with a few other things, all of a sudden, artificial intelligence became relevant, okay, and became valuable. And then people who knew AI were getting all kinds of, you couldn't hire them at universities because they were being hired away by Google and everyone else, right? So the technology may already be here. We just haven't quite.
Okay, so we're going to end on the most important question that we've asked all night. Address it to each one of you. What is it that you're most excited to do while you're visiting back here in the UP? Is it get a pasty? What is it? So Eric, we'll start with you and we'll work our way down.
Probably go to the ambassador tonight.
Good choice. All right.
Pickle leg at the doghouse.
I answered this earlier for Dennis, and I said, I really wish I had time to go cross-country skiing, but I'm really hoping to do is go see some waterfalls.
Linda, you want to weigh in?
I get to do everything I want every day.
I'm going to add some detail with Eric said. The garlic chicken pizza and the Keweenaw Peninsula beer at the ambassador.
I'll see you there. I'll see you there.
All right, and with that, Dan, you want to take a stab at this, or?
Oh, I'm with Linda. It's like
Which is the area we're in.
it's like the area we breathe. That's right. It's like remember that time we saw each other at Sweet Town, and we were so exhilarated from this one of the cross country ski areas in the area, and we both said, why would anyone want to live anywhere else? That's kind of where I am. Yeah, that's awesome. It's not just from skiing, but I mean, everything about the area. Yeah.
All right, and with that, we are going to call it an evening. Thank you all. Be sure to engage with the showcase tomorrow. Thank you to our panelists. Let's give them a big round of applause.
To those of you on Zoom, we apologize. We'll get it better tomorrow.